Okay, well, welcome everyone. It's nice to have you back. Nice to see you all. Thanks for joining. Today is the 10th of January, 2024, and this is our second class on the nature of humanity, where we've been discussing four great Jewish thinkers and writers on this question on the nature of humanity. Last week, we did Rabbi Soloveitchik, and today, we are going to focus on Rabbi Nachman of Breslov and Rav Kook. And last week, maybe we would characterize the discussion or the understanding of human nature on some level as being, a little more depressing, as we saw maybe in the writings of Rabbi Soloveitchik in terms of just how vulnerable we are, and the nature of tefillah in terms of the neediness that we have. But we also noted that within Rabbi Soloveitchik's configuration and understanding of human nature, there is this great opportunity for forgiveness, especially from God, because if in fact we are created in a vulnerable status and prone to make mistakes, then certainly God will forgive us for those mistakes. And that's in fact what Rabbi Soloveitchik wrote. He writes this in the context mostly of Purim, because Purim is a holiday that highlights the sort of haphazard nature of reality, that the Jews were sitting on the top of the world, and then just because one madman comes to power, the Jews are incredibly vulnerable. And of course, that is the whole notion of the poor, of the lottery, of the randomness of human life. Today, we're going to switch gears and look at an approach of Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, who writes, what we're going to see, he writes in a few places. I first came across it in Likutei Halachot, which is not written by Rabbi Nachman of Breslov. It's written by his student, Rabbi Natan, but based on the teachings of Rabbi Nachman. But and it's at the very beginning, the very first halacha. What Likutei Halachot does is it goes through the halachot of the Shulchan Aruch, and Rabbi Natan adds digests and explanations of Rabbi Nachman's teachings, which are thematically surrounding those halachot. But in this case, this teaching appears elsewhere in the actual writings of Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, and that's what we are going to look at today. And it is, in fact, fascinating and beautiful, really beautiful, beautiful Torah. So let me share my screen, and we will get right to it. Okay, so here is the source sheet. We'll start with Rabbi Nachman and then move to Rav Kook. Of course, as we have done in the past, I will pause and give people the opportunity to ask questions or make comments. So many of the comments that were made last week really enhanced the conversation and the shiur. And if you have something that you need to say while in the middle, just unmute yourself and just let her rip. We'll be informal here. So, Ravi Nachman here, this is Likutei Maharal, which is his main collection of teachings. And in this section, Rabbi Nachman is talking about the importance of giving people the benefit of the doubt. But the way he gets about it is, in my mind, really, really beautiful. So we'll jump right in. I actually, on this source sheet, I gave a lot of material. So what I will do is I will share the source sheet link in the comments, because we're not going to get to all of Rabbi Nachman's material here. But if anyone wants to see it on their own and go back to it on their own, just copy the copy the link that I'm about to post, and then you will have it. Okay, there it is. Okay, so let's get started. And just before we do that, welcome. It looks like Nate Chertok is joining us. Hi, Nate. Welcome. And let's get started. We're about to start Rabbi Nachman on the nature of humanity from the context of giving people the benefit of the doubt. So here's what Rabbi Nachman does. A person, we have to give every person, judge every person favorably, give people the benefit of the doubt. V'afilu mishehu rasha gamur, even someone who is completely wicked. Now we're going to see that this is not the only way to view wicked people. We do have a Mishnah, right? This notion of giving people the benefit of the doubt is based on is from a Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, right here. Yoshua ben Prachia v'nitai harbeli kiblu mehem. Yoshua ben Prachia omer aseh lecha rav uknei lecha chaver v'avedan kol adam l'kafsut. Judge every person favorably. Now, the Rambam writing on that has a very different take than Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, but we're going to come back to that. But I just wanted to get you in the context of this notion of judging people favorably is from the Mishnah, and essentially what the Rambam is going to say is we should judge everyone favorably except when we shouldn't. We'll have to explain a little bit more about what that means. But first, to Rabbi Nachman. So even a Rasha Gamur, right? Even a completely wicked person, Tarich l'chapes v'limtso bo eze me'at tov. This is really just this first half a sentence, although Rabbi Nachman's writing a very long sentence here, is so powerful and so beautiful. Even someone who's completely wicked, we have to work hard to find me'at tov, even a little bit of something positive in that person. Shebe'oto ha'ma'at eino rasha. So what Rabbi Nachman here is doing something very clever. Essentially, he is undermining the notion of the possibility even of a rasha gamur. Because if you find some good in the person, then in that nikudah, in that bit, the person is not a rasha, right? Comes to mind the TV show The Sopranos. Maybe some of you are familiar with The Sopranos, right? So these are bad people, but they're very good to their mothers, right? They really take care of their mothers. They put them in fancy nursing homes, and they do all they can for them. So maybe, I don't know if Rabbi Nachman knew any mob types, but that comes to mind, right? These are bad people, but there's a ma'at tov, and in that ma'at tov, they're not a rasha. So what's the upshot? What's the result of finding some good in them and judging them favorably in that regard? So this is more than just trying to find the good for them, because what happens is, as he says, when you find a little bit of good in them and judge them favorably, one genuinely elevates them to the scale of merit, and then that could bring them to to repentance. So what Rabbi Nachman seems to be saying here is our ability or our desire to find a little bit of good, even in individuals who may be otherwise defined as being rishaim gimurim, utterly and completely wicked. We elevate that person out of the doldrums, the spiritual doldrums, and that actually gives them a chance to do tshuva. Now, what may be going on here, and I think this is the case because of what Rabbi Nachman is going to say in a little while, what may be going on here is that this person may have judged themselves to be unworthy of tshuva. They may have judged themselves as to be complete rishaim, and therefore They've given up hope on doing any type of tshuva, any type of repentance. And so they're stuck. They're sort of like spiritually shackled to the reality that they think they're in. Comes along Rabbi Nachman and says, but if we look at a Rasha Gamor and we're able to find a little modicum of good, right? Then it's like a video game. We unlock the next level. And then once we unlock that level, they somehow will be able to do tshuva. So there are two things here. One is the way we look at people, but besides the way we look at people, we could help those people see themselves as better than they normally do. And it doesn't even seem that Rabbi Nachman here is talking about a situation where the other person knows that we're doing this. It just seems to happen. It's like a spiritual reality. That if we judge people favorably, then we will unlock in them the ability for them to repent. Now, certainly, if we act towards them in that way and we encourage people, certainly that could happen. But here it doesn't even seem like that is necessary. And let's just read a little bit more of a proof text for Rabbi Nachman, and then I'll stop and see if there are any comments or questions. So Rabbi Nachman then says, "V'zeh bechinat." This is the aspect of the od me'at ve'ein rasha. Here, Rabbi Nachman is looking at the Tehillim. So let's jump to that. Let's jump to that pasuk and see in the context what it is. This is Tehillim Lamed Zayin Yud. So let's go to that. In Lamed Zayin Yud, the pasuk says, "Ve'od ma'at ve'ein rasha, v'tbonanta al mikomo ve'enenu." For yet a little while, and the wicked shall not be, and thou shalt look well at his place, but he will not be there. So this is really interesting because what's going on here in that pasuk is talking about the destruction of the rasha, right? The destruction of the evil person. And here, Rabbi Nachman does something so beautiful with this pasuk. V'od ma'at ve'ein rasha, v'tbonat el mekamo ve'inenu, hainu shapasuk mazhir ladun et hakol lekapsut. Rabbi Nachman says, no. That pasuk is not talking about the destruction of the rasha. It's talking about this, about giving people the benefit of the doubt. What does that mean? Even though you see that the person is completely evil, afal pikein tzarich ata l'chapes ulevakesh limsobo me'at tov. Right, go back to the pasuk. Ve'od me'at. I'll highlight it here. Ve'od me'at. What Rabbi Nachman is saying here is, if you could find the me'at in the person, the ein rasha, then they're not a rasha anymore. Just find that little bit in the person that's not rasha gamor. That's how he is learning this pasuk, which is not shot, of course, in the pasuk, but so beautiful. And let's read it again. Hainu shapasuk mazhir ladun et kol hakol kafsut v'yaf pi shaparo eshu rasha gamor af al pikein tzarich ata lechapes ulevakesh limsobo me'at tov. That's that word again, me'at. Right? Me'at tov. Shesham eino rasha. Fine, like the mobster who's good to his mother, like we said. V'zehu ve'od ma'at ve'ein rasha. Tzarich ata levakesh bo od me'at tov. Sheish bo dain. Seek the little bit of good that's still left in the person. Shesham eino rasha. In that area, they're not a rasha. Yapishu rasha. Eich efshar she'ein bo ma'at tov adain. How is it possible for a person not to have some good in them? Right? Ki eich efshar, we'll highlight this. Ki eich efshar shelo asa eze mitzvah o davar tov miyama. Right? It's not possible that there be a situation where a person has no merit at all. Ad kidei kach is what Rabbi Nachman says we have to do in terms of giving people, of judging people favorably, which is not the same as giving people the benefit of the doubt necessarily, but judging people favorably. So let me stop here. We're almost at the end of this Keta of Rabbi Nachman. Let me stop here and see if this resonates with anyone, if this doesn't resonate with anyone, if it sort of matches up with one's understanding of how we are supposed to engage in our human relationships or not. Anyone have a comment or a thought they'd like to share? Just unmute yourself. If you can't unmute yourself, raise your virtual hand or put your screen on. Give you a chance to talk. Okay. Who wants to go first?
Rabbi, it seems in the current world situation today, Israel situation, that there are people that don't qualify for a little bit of good.
Okay. That's a very good point, strong point, Brian. I'll tell you that I often think about what you're saying in the context of what the Torah tells us, that all of humanity were created b'tselem Elokim, right? They were all created in the image of God. And I've always wondered, and I've never done the research on this, but I've always wondered, is it possible for someone to lose that claim? Is it possible for someone to act in such a way that they no longer deserve the dignity of what it means to be created b'tselem Elokim? I don't know the answer to that question. I will tell you from the Torah perspective, I'm not sure. Because then, right, for example, we learn the halacha of not leaving a deceased body unburied for too long from the person who was put to death by Beit Din because of their sins. Even that person's body is not allowed to indefinitely sort of be hanging in the public. And even the Mishnah says, the Gemara says, we have to choose a dignified death for people. So on some level, the Torah seems to be telling us that no matter what you've done, there's you still have a claim on dignity. But I'm with you, Brian. I really wonder about that, and would that apply to everyone, or there's some, because often the Torah has din melech, things that sort of fall outside the normal realm of halacha, and so your point is well taken, Brian. That in some cases it's hard to give people the benefit of the doubt. You're talking, of course, in the context of what's happened recently in Israel. Yeah, it's a good point and should be on all of our minds. But maybe on the other hand, Brian, it has to be that bad, right? It has to be that bad for us to say there's not even a me'at tov. While now, I also would say one other thing, by the way. Just because you find him a tov doesn't mean the person, is not. This is not what Rabbi Nachman's talking about. But even if you could find him a tov in a person who's otherwise a rasha, it doesn't mean that the person doesn't deserve punishment, doesn't deserve to be, dealt with within the context of a legal, of a legal system. But it allows us to look at people and not lose hope and feel that some people have really just become completely wicked. So it may not have to do with, in some cases, the political outcome. Okay. Anybody else wish to comment on what we've said so far? All right. So let's continue and finish this Keta on Rabbi Nachman, and then see the Rambam as sort of a foil, just to understand the radicalness of this statement. V'ayidei continues Rabbi Nachman, Shata motzei bo od ma'atov shesham eino rasha v'ata dan holokavkut. So once we find a little bit of good, and we judge that person favorably, so we then, this is sort of the spiritual piece, we lift that person out from the scale of guilt to the scale of merit. Ad sheyashuv b'tshuva al yidei zeh. Until as a result of this, he returns, he repents. As I said earlier, right, there's some sort of cosmic ability that we have to do this for people. V'zeu ve'od ma'at ve'ein rasha, adei shemotzei b'harasha, od me'at tov shesham eino rasha. By finding a little bit of good where the person is not a rasha, ayidei zeh, through this, bitbonanta al mikomo ve'einenu. I will look at their place, right? And they will not be there. I mean, the rasha will not be there anymore. Hainu kishnetbonein v'stakel al mikomo. We look at that person. Right? In the context of the pasuk, the pshat is we're going to look and God's going to destroy evil. But here we now see a different person in front of us. If we take a moment, right, to think about the person and consider that they must have done some good, some mitzvah in their life. We saw them a moment ago as a rasha. We look at them now, and they're very different. We no longer see that they're in their original place. Because we see them the little good. We see a small good point, and we judge them favorably. As he said earlier, then genuinely the scale is changed. And we will reflect upon that place, and they will not be there. It's no longer a wicked person. I was also wondering, maybe there's one other explanation of this, and that is that, so to speak, that if God sees us giving people the benefit of the doubt, then God would maybe say, oh, well, maybe like sort of, I judged them wrong. Right? Other people can find good in them, then maybe they're not as bad as God already thought. That seems to be a little much, but maybe that's what's going on here. Okay, yes, Ari.
Just two quick things, because I think you were referring to it, as I understand, like almost cosmically, our focusing on their good point somehow elevates them, and that's what you were just coming back to. I think another aspect, not the only one, I think there's some cosmic metaphysical thing he's describing, but then the other part is we always play up or play down to how we're viewed and what's expected of us. I remember going back to our Hal days. Unfortunately, I wasn't as good a basketball player as Rabbi Gelman. And anyway, they posted the list of people who made the team, and my name was on said list. And I played the best ball of my life that Friday afternoon before a bar mitzvah. And then on Monday, unfortunately, they said it was a mistake. Your name shouldn't have been on the list.
Oh, terrible.
Forget my personal tragedy and educational decisions that were made, but really, like, you're viewing someone and you say, hey, Tzaddik, good to see you. And then that person feels, inspired and does it. So that's one small thing I wanted to mention. The other thing is at the end, because
before you say the second thing, Ari, that's the opposite, right, of what we call the racism of low expectations.
Oh, yes, exactly.
Right? That's a great point. Great. So it's not only cosmic, it could be real in the right. Great. Okay.
And then the second just quick thing, and I'm sure you understand this, but I want to point it out because it resonated with me. When they're talking about you look at the place where he was and he's not there, the easiest way to view that is when we think of things either spatially, right? The guy used to be a mile behind me in this race, and I'm looking back and he's no longer there because he's catching up, or, he was like, 3 levels down on a metaphorical level, and now he's only like 1 level down. He's literally not in the place that he was. Like, he shifted, he's in a new place. Or with the scale, of course, it could be higher up, right? Like the weight has changed. But so I think it's beautiful, everything that he's doing here.
Great. Yeah, thank you for both those points. Okay. It's in our eyes, how we view the person also changes when we do this. Okay, Brian, I see you're ready to say something. Please. You're unmuted already. Go ahead. Oh, you are. I don't hear you for some reason. Sorry. Hold on. Okay. You're on two screens here, so you may have to unmute yourself on both of your devices. No, I don't hear you. Maybe I could. I'm not sure. I'm not sure why you're on two devices. Maybe get off of one. But in the meantime, we'll go ahead, and when you figure that out, we'll be happy to hear what you want to share.
Okay, you should be able to. Well, you can hear me too well. Hold on. I've got the text on. I've got the text on the one screen.
I see. Okay, now we can hear you loud and clear without the echo. Thank you.
Okay, so at the end of all that, no, I didn't have anything to say.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. Well, I wish you did, but next time. Okay. I just want to contrast what Rabbi Nachman did here with what the Rambam does, because we saw before the text of Havedan et kol adam l'kaf zchut. I don't know where that Mishnah went; it sort of disappeared. But here it is on top. But we have the Rambam. So this is the Rambam's commentary on Pirkei Avot, and he says, "Judge every person is meritorious." Inyano kisheyeh adam shelo tedabo im tzadiku im rasha v'tireu sheyaseh maseh o yomar davar im tifarsheu al derech achat yetov im tifarsheu al derech acheret yera. If you have a person, you don't know them, you don't know they're good or bad, and they do something which can be interpreted either as good or bad. Aval im yiyeh adam notesh hu tzadik meforsam lo tatovot v'nirelo poel shekol yom morim shehu poel ra. However, if you do know a person and they are well known to be a righteous person, but they seem to be doing something that is not right, it would take a lot of imagination to judge that favorably. And it's far away. It's a far off possibility. So if the person's a well-known righteous person, even if they do something which is not good, give them the benefit of the doubt. Now, I do want to say, with all that goes on today in terms of scandals and rabbis and religious leaders doing things, I think we have to be careful about just how to apply this Rambam. So this Rambam should not be applied. Don't try this at home, right? I guess that's the point. So it's an important caveat. But what he says next is, and you shouldn't suspect them if they are otherwise considered to be good. But again, like I said, we'll take that with a grain of salt. But then he says, וכן כשרשע ויתפרסמו מעשיו ואחר כך ראינו שיעשה מעשה שכל ראותיו מורות שהוא טוב ויש בו צער רחוק לרע. If another person who's known to be a bad person and they do something which is easier to interpret as good, but if you really try hard, you can interpret it as bad. ראוי להישמר ממנו ושלא תאמין בו שהוא טוב. In that case, even if it's easier to understand what that person did as a good thing, you shouldn't, because they have a bad reputation. They've already been sort of classified as a rasha. Both sides of shut rachok l'ra. Ra'uli shamer mimenu v'shelo ta'amin bo shu tov achar sheyesh bo efsharut l'ra. V'al zeh ne'amar ki yechanen kolo al ta'amin bo. Though he be fair-spoken, do not trust in him. So this is very different than Rabbi Nachman. Right, Rabbi Nachman is saying you have a person who is really bad. There's got to be something good. There's got to be something positive that person has done, so as to elevate their position out of the category of a rasha. Again, very different than the Rambam, and the Rambam here is really hard to understand. Right, the person is a rasha, but all things point to them doing something good. But nonetheless, the Rambam says we still have to suspect them of being up to no good. It's a difficult, I think, Rambam to put into practice. but I brought it as contrast to Rabbi Nachman. All right, did you want to make a comment?
Yeah. No, somehow, despite your important caveat about like the rabbis and the plus side, somehow the Russia side bothered me more, right? Because you're like, this guy's doing something good and
Right.
Rambam's counting it. But one thing I could say that makes a little sense, and I think is sort of the backdrop for at least part of what Rambam is saying, is if you would take writings, let's just say we're talking about an author. And you're saying, I have Rabbi Soloveitchik in the piece you read last week, and you have 30 paragraphs where Rabbi Soloveitchik writes about topic A. And then you have another paragraph that just, seems like it's going in a different direction somewhere else. I think it's fair to say, or even with Tanakh itself, not just with modern thinkers, right, that you're going to say, I'm going to interpret this one paragraph that I'm not sure what it means, even if it's a stretch, in light of these 90 other things that this thinker believes, or in light of these 30 other psukim or gemarot or halachot in our tradition, etc. Based on everything we need, I'm going to reinterpret it, not as like a stretch, but because there's a logic in that, right? That in the based on everything we know about this thinker, he must have meant this and just spoken too fast here or whatever. So anyway, if that's a frame reference, that
that's really interesting, and I like the literary approach. I was just thinking it's a little different in the sense that this is an action where the outcome is good. It seems like the purpose is good and the reason is good, and yet but yeah, and I think that's
back to
also
your Sopranos. Maybe it's just saying someone seems like they're doing a good deed, but I know they always have an ulterior motive based on everything else I've seen.
right.
So
Sometimes you see this, right, in people who are trying to do good, and then you really wonder, is it all for themselves? But it's a hard and exhausting way to live.
Agreed. Anyway, and this was just the contrast with Rav Nachman. So sorry, please
Yeah.
go on.
Okay, then Rabbi Nachman. Go ahead, Brian.
Does this mean we don't need to show up for next week's class on doing business with unethical companies?
I don't know. I don't want to ruin the surprise, but because they're unethical, we can't give them our business. Is that what you're suggesting?
We shouldn't.
Right.
We shouldn't be talking to them. We shouldn't trust them.
All right. Well, we'll see. We'll see how much of this applies to that. That's a really good question about trust of a company like that. Okay. Thank you. All right. Now, if there are no more comments, I want to look at what Rabbi Nachman does next with this, which is amazing. Because up until now, he's been talking about other people. But now he says, V'chein sarich adam limtzo gam be'atzmo. Right? Everything that we've been saying about other people, we have to also do for ourselves. Hizei adua, shetzarich adam lizaher me'od lihiyot b'simcha tamid, u'laharchik ha'atzvut me'od me'od. We have to be happy and keep far away from depression. And it's sort of understood that Rabbi Nachman suffered from depression. Which puts a whole nother understanding of this. This is a theme he returns to often. And who hasn't done this? Right? You look at yourself and you start to doubt yourself, and you think that you're no good. Full of sins. And the result is that the evil one, which I guess some sort of depression, Yetzer Hara. It's interesting, right? The Yetzer Hara here for Rabbi Nachman is not the force that makes us sin, it's the force that makes us hate ourselves. Right? That's the Yetzer Hara, which is so awesome, right? Such an amazing idea going back to Tselem Elokim, there's the essence of God, and there's some good in everyone, but it's the evil one, it's the Yetzer Hara that tries to force us to look at ourselves in a negative light. We are not allowed to give into this. We have to find in ourselves a little good. The same thing we say about some other person. We say about ourselves. How is it possible that we didn't do a mitzvah somewhere down the road? Listen to the insight Rabbi Nachman says here. Okay, so I find that I did something good, but then I begin to second guess myself. Oh, did I do that because it was good? Or did I do that for some ulterior motive? Did I give the tzedakah to give tzedakah, or did I give the tzedakah to get credit? Did I go visit someone in the hospital so that people would say something good about me? Did I, whatever it is, right? I did a mitzvah, and then I start to second guess myself whether that mitzvah had ulterior motives. Right, so this feels like it's coming from someone who's been down this road. Listen to even the mitzvah or the holy thing that we've done, it's full of impure motives, external thoughts, and faults. Nonetheless, there must be something good in this. At the end of the day, there was something good in that mitzvah. And Rabbi Nachman goes on along the same lines as he did above, in terms of giving people the benefit of the doubt. So we have to give other people the benefit of the doubt, but then he actually, in this case, he's reading the Mishnah, Kipshuto, have dana kol ha'adam l'kafsut, everyone, including ourselves. So I found this to be a really interesting thing to consider, because it sounds like Rabbi Nachman is saying that it's easier to find merit in other people than it is in ourselves. But I've always found the opposite to be true. Right? It's much easier for me to find an excuse for my behavior that may not have been stellar than to find an excuse for someone else's behavior that may not have been stellar. Right? It seems like we're much easier. It's much easier for people to give ourselves the benefit of the doubt than to give other people the benefit of the doubt. But here, Rabbi Nachman, I think by putting it second and starting off with v'chein sarich adam, likewise a person, right? It feels like he finds this harder to do than the first one. But nevertheless, it's a beautiful idea in the sense that it reminds us to not lose faith in ourselves, and that's the main teaching of this Likutei Maharal. And by the way, this is the first halacha taught in the sefer that I started out showing you, right? In Likutei Halachot, right? The first thing we're supposed to do when we get up in the morning, right, is find the ma'at tov in ourselves and others. Right? Find the little good, even if we're not necessarily so high on ourselves, in ourselves and others. That's the very first halacha in Likutei Halachot. So here it's in Likutei Maharal 282, but it is in Likutei Halachot Halacha Aleph, the very first thing that Rabbi Nachman's student, Rabbi Natan, talks about in Likutei Halachot. Okay.
And he talks about both for others and ourselves there as well? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And he goes on and on. He talks about because it's connected to the Karbanot, and the Karbanot is about separating the good from the bad. And he talks about how this turns into song, because song is the ability to find the notes that match up with each other, and taking the good notes and rejecting the bad notes. There are lots of themes in here, and also why we read certain parts of Bereshit. That's what God did when God created the world. He did a birur, a selection or a separation between the good parts and the bad parts. There's a major theme here going on, and the sense is that we have to part of being able to give people the benefit of the doubt is to be able to sort of use some sort of mental sieve to be able to separate the good and the bad, and be left with the good for others and ourselves. So in terms of Rabbi Nachman's view of humanity, this is really very powerful stuff in terms of simply what we can achieve either cosmically or, as Ari said, in reality, by showing people, even if, and from a cosmic level, even if we don't share it with them, something happens in the air that we're able to elevate people. And I actually always find this interesting, and then we'll move on to Rav Kook. It is a leadership lesson, I think, too, in the sense that if you tell people that they're terrible and that they're sinning, they have to fix their sins. If you hear that enough, you internalize it. So that's another approach to leadership is no, we're good. We could do this. We're capable. We're tov. We're not rasha. We're not ra. And build people up through a positive approach. Sometimes Musar gets a bad rap because I think there are two types of Musar. One type of Musar is you're a terrible person. Look what you've done. Look at all the sins you've done. But another type of Musar is look at the potential you have. So it depends on how you teach Musar. For most of when I was in yeshiva, and I had the other type of Musar. I had talking about how, Ari, I don't want to say the rabbi's name, but there was a rabbi who had a zap book. It was a black notebook with a sticker of a lightning bolt on the front of it. And whenever you did something wrong, he immediately put you down in the zap book with a demerit. And he said, I remember him saying, I'm less forgiving than God because God gives you second chances. I don't give you second chances. So it only occurred to me what a bad message that was many years later. Okay. All right. So that's Rabbi Nachman and some beautiful ideas of how we should think about human beings. I think someone in the chat had something to say. Nevarduk versus Labaka. Yeah. So in Nevarduk, Yitz Greenberg talks about this, that Nevarduk is one of the famous Musar yeshivot, and they used to have this practice. They would go into a fruit store and they would say, I'd like to buy a pair of shoes. And the guy would like, what are you, an idiot? This is a fruit store. We don't sell shoes here. And they dafka would put themselves in a position to sort of be demeaned in order for them to understand their place. But there's another way, right? And this is Slabatka, this is Heschel, who says every time we meet someone, we should realize that we're meeting Selam Elokim, which is a very different way of looking at things. Okay, and that makes sense because Heschel was more of a chassid than a Litvak. Okay, I want to move on to Rav Kook, and I think that Rav Kook somehow dovetails well with Rabbi Nachman. You see, I gave you a lot of Rabbi Nachman, and I put the link in the chat if you want to see it on your own. Here's Rav Kook. Rav Kook here is commenting. This is one of my all-time favorite pieces of Torah. I'm sure we all have them. Our favorite Divrei Torah, our favorite authors, our favorite sayings. This is one of my all-time favorites. So this is Rav Kook commenting on the end of the Amidah of Yom Kippur. Before Vidui, we say Elokai ad shelo notzarti eini kedai, v'achshav shenotzarti ki ilu lo notzarti. It's a very cryptic thing. My God, before I was created, I was not worthy. And now that I have been created, it is as if I have not been created. What on earth does that mean? It's a little bit of a tongue twister. But Rav Kook says something so powerful here. I think it connects to Rabbi Nachman. So he says, "Lifnei shenotzarti, kol oto azman habilti mubal shemeolam ad shenotzarti." Before I was created, the entire boundless time, from the beginning of creation until I was created, Vadai lo hayad davar ba'olam sheyat tzarich li. I was not needed. Because if I was needed, God would have created me. So until I was created, I was not needed. Kim hayiti chaser b'shvil ezet tachlit v'ashlama hayiti notzer. Because if I could make up any deficiency that existed, God would have created me already. The kevan shenotzarti ad oto azman hu ot shelo hayiti kedai ad az lihivro. The fact that I was not created until I was is a sign that I was not kedai. I was not worthy of being born. That's the first part of the sentence. Elokai ad shelo notzarti eini kedai. Until you created me, I was not worthy because you didn't need me. God didn't need me. However, however, I was only needed at the moment that you created me. This is amazing. When you created me, it's clear that you put me here because I, only me, was needed in order to complete some deficiency in the world. El tachlit briati hineni achshav kedai. And however, if I would focus myself on the purpose of my creation, then I would be worthy. Aval kevan she'ein ma'asai mechuvanim l'tov hatachlit. However, since my deeds are not directed towards the good purpose, harei lo higati el tachlit briati ve'eni adayin kedai kemo kodem lachem. That's the end. Before I was created, you need me. Now God needs me to do something in this world, but I'm missing the mark. So I might as well have not been created. It's actually as if I haven't been created, because I'm supposed to be doing A and instead I'm doing B. Okay, so that's the meaning of Rav Kook. So a few things, and then we'll see if there are any comments or questions. One is this, in terms of the theme of this series, the nature of humanity, right? Rav Kook is saying that every single person has a specific purpose here on earth. There's no useless person. There's no person just filling space. There's no redundant person. Every person has a tachlit. And we were put here just at the right time to do what we have to do, because based on our abilities, based on our background, based on our current circumstances, right? We have the capacity to do something that no one else can do. That's the ramification of what Rav Kook is saying. The trick is, and I'm not sure how to do this, is figuring out what that tachlit is. Rav Kook doesn't tell us that. Right? That's the trick. What is the tachlit? If I'm put here for a purpose, and if I don't act on that purpose, it's as if I was not created. Great. That is so uplifting and so powerful. But how am I supposed to figure out what it is exactly that I'm supposed to do? So that's Rav Kook's view on humanity. Brian, please.
Could is that purpose necessarily good, or could that purpose be evil or some other attribute?
Good question. My inclination is good because God put us here to fulfill something. And I'd like to think that God does not set us up to be evil. We could choose to be evil, and maybe that's what he means by missing our mark. But to be put here to do something bad, I hope that's not the case. I don't think it's the case. Does anyone want to take a stab at answering this question? How are we supposed to figure out what our tachlit is? Serena?
Yeah, so I'm feeling like that's your whole life's work, to figure out what you're supposed to do. You don't, I mean, it's very nice if you come into the world knowing exactly I'm supposed to live the exact lifestyle of my parents and continue the legacy and some, particular brand of frum, let's call it. If they even buy into what their parents raised them to, then they know exactly, and then there's no questions. But I think for most of us, it's a life work.
Okay. But do we ever, and so we just keep doing the best we can, trying to be the best version of ourselves.
Well, I was also thinking, like, thou shalt not murder, but the word murder does not mean kill, it means murder. So in a war, you can kill. So Hamas comes and attacks Israel, and they have disagreed with Allah, because Allah said that I should be alive, and now they made me dead. So they, it's kind of chutzpah. It's contradicting what Hashem wanted, that person should be alive. But now it's not the same chutzpah, apparently, to fight them back in a war.
Right. Right. So I think maybe what you're saying is, and I do believe this to be true, right? Our tachlit can change. Like as our life experience and our circumstances change, but there is some nikuda about us that Rav Kook seems to be saying is unique and only we can do. And I will note, without going into it, that Rav Soloveitchik says this explicitly. Rav Soloveitchik says something so powerful. I've taught this before in the Kehillah, where he says, and this is found in Nefesh Harav, quoting, this is Rav Hershel Schachter quoting Rabbi Soloveitchik, says that when we are obligated, in short, he says we are obligated to imitate God, right? V'halachta b'drachav, we're supposed to imitate God. Says Rabbi Soloveitchik, God's most unique attribute is God's uniqueness, because God is one. When we say Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, we don't mean one, because you can have one apple and another apple. So there's one apple which is not the same as the other apple, but it's similar. But Echad, in God's sense, doesn't mean similar. It means completely unique, because there is nothing like God. And if we are supposed to imitate God and God is unique, then we are supposed to be unique. And we're not supposed to copy other people. God doesn't need, another Brian Kapinski. God has the one that he needs. And so someone else needs to be their person. So on some level, Rabbi Soloveitchik and Rav Kook are saying something very similar in that regard. I once saw a comment, I think by the Satmar Rebbe, in terms of trying to understand our tachlit, our purpose, and that is the things that may be hardest for us are the areas where we could excel the greatest, the most.
So,
yeah.
Just two quick thoughts, if I'm not cutting anyone off. I think on the first hand, the very important question you raise about how we know our life's mission, I almost feel it's a great question, but it doesn't take away from the power of this piece, right? It's separate.
Right.
It's almost like there could be a beautiful piece about the importance of marriage, and shalom bayit within marriage. And then you say, but how do you do that, Rabbi, practically day in, day out? And it's like, okay, there are volumes to be written and a lot of advice and hardware, et cetera, right? So that was just sort of my first thought. The second thought is I always go back and forth between what you're saying, which I think is a Musser approach. It's almost like, you know, the thing that's wrong with you is what bothers you and other people and whatever. And like the thing that's hardest is what you need to work on. But I kind of feel like the clue is in the opposite direction. Like if you, Barry, are creative, if you're a good speaker, if you're a good, right? Like it's not about ignoring those talents. And you'd like to think that your life's work aligns with those skills that you have.
Which certainly makes more sense in the context of what Rav Kook is saying, that we're put here within the context of our lives, our background, our education, and to say that we have to sort of work against those things in order to find where we're going to be able to make the greatest impact. Although on the other hand, I think maybe what the Satmar Rebbe was trying to say is we shouldn't shy away from the difficult challenges. It could be in those areas of the difficult challenges where your unique capabilities can make a big difference. And if you shy away because it's harder, then there's going to be a hole. So it could be we're using all of our stuff, but taking up a challenge. And I think that's I don't think that's mutually exclusive to what you said. Yeah. So that's Rav Kook, and I think that dovetails well with Rabbi Nachman in the sense that Rabbi Nachman is saying we all have this nikuda tova. Sometimes you have to find it, right? Sometimes we need other people to help us find it. Sometimes we could find it on our own. And similarly, Rav Kook is saying there is this specific point within a person for which they were created, and only they could make that difference. Just in closing, before we take any final questions, I think it was Shai Agnon who wrote this beautiful explanation of Kaddish, where he tries to explain why it is that we sit. What's the relationship between Kaddish and death? There's no mention of death in Kaddish. Kaddish is about uplifting God, and what he essentially says is that when a person dies, he says God is different than a general. With a general, if a soldier dies, you just replace that soldier with another soldier. But when it comes to God, when a person dies, that person in God's mind is irreplaceable. And something actually has been lost from God. So we say it gadal v'yit gadash. We want to sort of rebuild God because God has lost an irreplaceable element of God's self, and which is all similar to Rav Kook and to the Rav and to Rabbi Nachman, who also says that there is this element of us which is special and good and can never actually be taken away from us. We have to work hard to find it in other people, and maybe even harder to find it in ourselves, and to find the specific conflict that we were here to succeed in. So that is Rabbi Nachman, and that is Rav Kook on the nature of humanity. Before we close, I want to just remind everyone that starting next week, we have a new 3-part series called Jewish Law and Moral Society. And the 3 topics are doing business with unethical companies. That's on the 17th. Then we have Judaism and political power on the 24th. And then poverty, hunger, and homelessness on the 31st. And I hope you could join for those. So before we say Erev Tov, any last notes or comments or questions? I see that Ari is unmuted and Serena is unmuted. Serena, do you want to mention something?
Yeah, this Reb Nachman, just to understand, maybe you mentioned it and I wasn't paying attention or something, that this is the same Nachman of Breslov, the Nach, like when they're walking around Israel saying Nachman, like, are they thinking any thoughts that relate to what we've been learning tonight?
I don't know. I don't know very much about contemporary Breslov Chassidut, so I don't know. Yeah.
So there's a a Dvar Torah that I heard a very long time ago, which in a nutshell relates to the second Rav Nachman that you did in an interesting way, I think. When we say in davening, "V'heisir Satan milfanenu u'me'acharenu," right, remove Satan from before us and after us, we generally translate this in spatial terms. And the Vort, I believe it was a commentary called Sukkot David, the Vort was, it means in a temporal sense, in time. Don't let Satan mess you up beforehand. We realize all the ways Satan could do that, right? Stop you from well, but also afterwards. And so what was the afterwards? The afterwards, the way he said it in that sefer was like, you did a good thing, you went to this shir, you felt really good about it, and then they said, no, it wasn't so good, and like you just sort of like play up the aggravation and play down the good part. But Reb Nachman took it in a different direction, because Sir Satan me'acharenu, you said it was about self-doubt, and I did that mitzvah, but maybe I didn't do that mitzvah properly, etc.
Right. Beautiful.
So that's sort of like another take on how you could feel bad post a mitzvah, but it's really just the Satan trying to mess you up, however you understand.
Beautiful. Thank you. That's a great note to end on. Okay. Yeshkach, everyone. Thanks for coming on. Miriam and Ben, I didn't have a chance to welcome you when you first came on. Nice to have you guys on. Happy you joined. And I hope to see you again, either on Shabbos for those of you locals, or next week, same time, same channel, for the next series. Laila Tov, everyone. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.